Chapter 150. Shizun and I swapped rooms. This small town had become famous because of Dawning Peak. But after the affair with the fake Gojin, in which the weapons of Jincheng Lake had been completely destroyed, visitors to the town had dried up. Many of the inns that had provided accommodation for those who came seeking swords closed down due to the slump in traffic or took up different businesses. Nevertheless, the inn with the hot springs stubbornly survived. Thanks to Nangonggong's grand wedding, many of the guests coming to Rufeng's sect to attend the reception would definitely settle in Dai City first, and thus the inn had momentarily returned to its former glory. Chu Chengyong swept aside the bamboo curtain and stepped into the foyer.
"Hey boss, here to check in." "404?
Before he could answer, a low voice from behind said,
45.
Moran had walked quickly to join them in time. Shu Meng was surprised to see him.
"You were done that fast?"
Moran was taken aback. His expression soured, and he thought angrily, how long does it take for yours to go down? For him, it had been a simple matter of reciting the mind purification mantra a few times while sitting at the tea stall. But no, he knew Shu Meng wasn't talking about that at all, and he couldn't make a scene, so he nodded quietly.
"You swallowed the melon seeds without even spitting out the shells, didn't you?"
Moran seethed, but had no comeback.
"Honored guests, how many rooms would you like for the 5 of you?"
Chu Chengyong replied,
"My wife and I will share one, plus we need 3 more of your best suits, so 4 in total."
Moran was somewhat agitated as he listened to his uncle make arrangements, though he didn't show it. He'd harbored a secret hope that the same thing would happen as in the past, where the boss would tell them that there was no vacancies and they'd have to double up. That way he could forget it. He knew he wouldn't be able to make a move. But the thought of staying in the same room alone with Chu Wanning made his heart burn, unsettled him, and thrilled him just a bit. After all, the blood of a carnivorous beast flowed in his veins. Luck wasn't on his side today, however. This time, the manager quite happily answered,
"Yes, sir, 4 of our best suits."
He turned and took 4 keys from the cabinet, then declared,
"Honored guests, 2nd floor, this way, please."
Moran gave him a deep, silent look, feeling somewhat glum.
"You dumbass,"
he thought.
"What's with that happy expression over 4 rooms? What's there to be happy about? What's so good about making more money?" "Runner, why are you gripping the counter like that?"
Moran silently withdrew his hands and forced a faint smile. Cracks showed on the bottom of the wooden board he had been gripping. Had he used any force, it would have snapped into pieces.
"No reason."
After taking his key from Chu Chengyong and heading upstairs, Moran stopped in front of the door assigned to him with some surprise. When he turned his head, he saw Chu Wanning looking back at him.
"You're staying in that room?"
Yeah." Moran hesitated, lashes lowered, then raised his gaze despite himself and studied Chu Wanning with those bright black eyes.
"Does Shizun remember?" "Remember what?"
Moran pointed at his door.
"That time we came to seek weapons. This was the room Shizun stayed in."
Chu Wanning didn't answer. Moran watched him cautiously. He couldn't conceal a flicker of hope as he asked tentatively,
"Shizun, do you still remember?"
Chu Wanning thought to himself,
"How could I not?"
As he climbed the creaking stairs that had long since fallen into disrepair, thoughts of the past had filled him with every step. Memories had floated to the surface, carrying the decaying smell of wood soaked in the passing of ages. He could almost see the young Moran pushing open the door with an irreverent and frivolous expression, cracking a smile at him as he did so. His dimpled grin was light, yet profound with years. At his long silence, Moran appeared somewhat disappointed and lowered his gaze. Maybe I remembered wrong, mixed it up. You're right. Moran's head shot up. Chu Wanning gazed at him, then seemed to smile faintly. You weren't mistaken. It was indeed this room. His words were a spark that ignited the darkness in Moran's eyes, and the corners of his lips slowly bowed in a sweet smile, as if he'd tasted some delectable candy. He pointed toward the room Chu Wanning was to stay in for the night, and in his joy blurted out unreservedly, And the room Shizun is staying in tonight was the one I stayed in last time. But this only made Chu Wanning embarrassed, and his smile vanished as he huffed indignantly. That I don't recall. So saying, he pushed open the door and went in, leaving Moran in the hall. Moran blinked after him. What had he done to upset him this time? He didn't dare go to the baths to soak in the hot springs that night. Better safe than sorry. Moran felt as though he stood on the precipice of desire. If he were to catch sight of Chu Wanning looking even the slightest bit sensual, he wasn't sure he could remain a gentleman, could resist picking this forbidden cliffside flower. Instead, he lay in bed, arms pillowed behind his head, horribly bored, and mulled over what had lately passed between him and Chu Wanning. Moran knew he wasn't a very smart person, and that Chu Wanning was like a big white cat. He wanted to treat Chu Wanning well, to take care of the snow-white kitty. Yet every time he tried to stroke it, he only managed a couple of pats before the white cat's claws swiped at him like he'd rubbed its fur the wrong way. He felt it was his fault, but at the same time, he really didn't know where he was allowed to touch this cat and where he wasn't. He was like someone who had just started keeping a cat. All his knowledge was fragmentary, and he could only think to grab that white cat and lick its fur. And that, in turn, would earn him an angry yowl and a swipe of the claws. Moran turned over and blinked, feeling rather depressed. Yet it was at this moment that he realized, with the floor plan of this inn, his bed was pressed right next to the bed of the room next door, separated merely by a single wooden wall. The instant this thought surfaced, any chance Moran had of falling asleep dwindled to practically nothing. He felt his mouth go dry. Had Chu Wanning taken his bath? Or was he getting ready to? But Moran had barely heard any movement from the next room. If Chu Wanning didn't plan to bath, did that mean that he already lay down? If so, they were in truth awfully close to each other now. And if it weren't for that thin wooden board that divided their rooms, they would be lying next to each other, lying together. The thought alone made the young man's blood boil, surging dangerously like a volcano in shallow dormancy, yet to erupt. Unconsciously, he shifted his body to press firmly against the wall. A wall made of wood was different from one of brick. After all, wooden planks could only be 2 or 3 fingers thick. Moran thought to himself, Chu Wanning is lying there, mere inches away from me, stripped of his clothes and perhaps only wearing a thin inner robe. He closed his eyes and swallowed hard. He could feel his heart burning, scorching his entire body, blazing heat that reached his face, his eyes. His eyes weren't open, but if they had been, they would have been laced with red, bloodshot. Ah, he abruptly remembered another fact, one so thrilling his entire body went taut, his blood rushing south. He had once jerked off on the very bed that Chu Wanning was now sleeping in. His memories of years past were so sticky, sinful, and sweet. The recollection sent tension throughout his body. That year, he remembered, he had gone to the hot springs and had accidentally tripped, falling into Chu Wanning's arms. That feverish heat wouldn't fade, no matter how he tried. So he'd given in, rubbing one out with his forehead pressed to the wall, releasing his desire on his own. Moran cracked his eyes open a slit, his eyes dark as pitch, yet with scarlet lava surging beneath. He once again pressed his forehead to the wall. It felt like his heart would burst. How had he been such a fool? He had blatantly always felt desire and love. So how had he not noticed? He placed one hand on the wall. He did try to restrain himself, but he really couldn't. When he didn't know he loved Chu Wanning, he could think of the man and relieve himself without scruple. But now that he'd fallen in love, he was destined to never obtain that man on the other side of the wall, no matter how hard he wished. Even dreaming it would feel dirty, like he was defiling Chu Wanning. Holding back lust by force of will was pure torment for a young body so full of vigor. The tip of his nose brushed the wall as he pushed his feverish body against that flimsy surface, his mind a chaotic mess. His eyes were unfocused, and as passion grew in him, swelling every minute, an illusion took hold. It seemed as if Chu Wanning's breathing and the faint fragrance of high tongue that clung to his body had permeated the cracks in the wood grain and seeped into Moran's bed, thoroughly enveloping him. Chu Wanning's scent was enticing him, pitying him. It tempted his beastly desire while pitying his humanity. It lured him to burn in the flames of lust, and pitied him for what he wanted but could not have. Lost in this temptation and pity, Moran's brows drew together in pain, and the hands pressed to the wall tensed, showing sinew and bone. But his ruthless expression was belied by his pleas, near sobs, as he murmured softly, "Chu Wanning, Wanning." What he didn't know was that on the other side of the wall, Chu Wanning likewise hadn't dared to go to the hot springs for a bath. Just as Moran had envisioned, he had already lain down to sleep. And at this moment, Chu Wanning was also thinking of Moran, yearning for him. He stroked the cool wooden planks with his long, slender fingers, his forehead also pressed to this heartless wall. In the past life, the misunderstandings between the pair had been so deep that they had lost their way, had been divided by a tremendous abyss. In this life, they filled that abyss with their blood, turning it into a crimson sea they could sail to each other's side. Yet, because of this barrier, they could not see the surging tides of one another's passion and had no choice but to ride the turbulent overflowing waves of their own desires. But they were so close. It was almost as if Moran could hear Chu Wanning's heartbeat, and Chu Wanning could almost hear Moran's breathing. Someone banged on Moran's door. Startled, Moran shouted irritably, "Who is it?" His shout also startled Chu Wanning next door, who instantly realized that Moran really had been sleeping, nestled against the wall, pressed so close that his deep and hoarse voice seemed to have sounded right next to his pillow. He unconsciously clenched his fists, silently opening his phoenix eyes in the darkness. "It's Chu Mang," came the voice outside. "My mom said she packed my stuff with yours. Open the door, I want you to take a bath." Eavesdropping was obviously not a good deed, but Chu Wanning thought, "I'm not eavesdropping. It's the planks that are too thin. The soundproofing of the room, that's terrible. It's Chu Mang who's too loud." Either way, it wasn't like he wanted to listen in, Chu Wanning thought as he wrapped the blanket tighter and shuffled closer to the wall. Next door, the bed creaked, and after a moment, the door opened. Chu Mang's voice came again. You're already in bed? So early." "I'm tired." Moran sounded a little strangled. "Get a move on. You woke me up. Take your clothes and go, go, go."
What's the rush?
Showman paused. Then a trace of suspicion colored his voice.
Locking your door so early and holding up in there. I barely said 2 words and you're getting all pissy. Don't tell me you were.
What? What was he doing? Chu Wanning's eyes widened, and his mind unconsciously wandered back to when he dropped against Moran's body at the lotus pond. That youth possessed an overabundance of vitality and virility, a lethal potency waiting to strike. As a young man in his early 20s who didn't practice the abstinence-based cultivation method Chu Wanning did, how much roiling lava was concealed under that skin? How often would someone like that have to relieve himself? Chu Wanning didn't know any of that. He had been abstinent for too long. It wasn't something he understood. Now he wanted to know, but this curiosity was held back by his haughtiness and his self-respect. How could someone as proud as he was ask this sort of question? He couldn't possibly pull a random disciple aside and say, "Excuse me, sorry to trouble you. I want to know how many times a week do men in their prime need to relieve themselves?" Perish this perverted thought. Of course, Xisheng Peak's libraries contained books related to romance and jewel cultivation, but every book borrowed required the borrower to log their name, and Chu Wanning really couldn't imagine the following words appearing on the logs. The Legend of the Bedchamber Heroes. Tales from the Central Sea. Borrower, Yuheng Elder, Chu Wanning. Death would be preferable.